Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's online session, Motor Pool for Municipal Fleets. For those of you that have never participated in one of our webinars before, this session is really a forum for us to help educate the fleet community and share some information regarding industry best practices. Today, I'm going to ask if anyone's come on board, if you could please mute your microphone. But today we'll be discussing, really, in my mind, what's an important topic that's especially relevant during periods of budget constraints and as staff sort of slowly return to work, by focusing on how fleets can dramatically improve vehicle productivity through motor pool management, specifically for municipal fleets. As a way of introduction, if I can get my screen to change here, my name is Ron Katz, and I'm Senior Director of National Accounts for Agile Fleet. We're a software company based in Chantilly, Virginia. And today I'm pleased to be joined by two really effective fleet professionals who together have made some major improvements in fleet utilization and cost reductions in Scott County, Minnesota. So we're going to start with Aaron Cotilla up in the upper right-hand corner, actually is out sick today, so joining us is going to be Troy Bean, who's the fleet manager for Scott County, and Jason Allen, who's the system management specialist, who will help me cover today's session as we get into this. So Troy and Jason are going to begin today's session by sharing just a bit of real-world experience in some of the challenges that they faced as they look to drive ongoing efficiencies at the county. They'll describe a little bit about how they transformed the paradigm where drivers used to have assigned vehicles or get reimbursed for business use of their personal vehicles, all while sort of refining their fleet management practices and policies to really achieve some tremendous savings. I'll then look to build on their message by discussing how each of you might write your own success story and really benefit from some of the tools and approaches that were implemented and adopted by Scott County. And before we get started, I want to let everybody know that we'll be recording today's session and making this content available to each of you in the days ahead. So really feel free to sit back and relax. Should you have any questions, feel free to just open them or put them into the chat function, and we'll address them as we move through the session or when we get to the end about the Q&A. So with that bit of background complete, I'll turn the microphone over to, I think, Jason. I think you're going to do the talking at this point. So let's get started.
Perfect. Well, thanks, Ron, and thanks for letting us be a part of this this forum today. We're excited to give information and just share what we've learned over the last few years regarding our motor pool system and the things that we've done here in managing our fleet and really delivering what matters to our employees and also the taxpayers that live in our county, trying to be as efficient as we can with our dollars that we spend in our motor pool system. Ron, you can go ahead and advance the next screen here, next slide. So this all really started back in 2012, 2013. We had to take a look at our motor pool. We had vehicles, we had cars that technically maybe not be moving as much as we should. We didn't know much about them. So we really looked at what can we do to better our motor pool. We took a look at number one thing was our mileage reimbursements were skyrocketing. We were paying over $230,000 a year in mileage reimbursements to staff. Of dollars that were being reimbursed per mile, whatever the federal government says the dollar rate is, we were paying that out, and it was $230,000+ a year. Some of those staff mileages were inflated, and not to say that we don't have honest employees, but somebody did an 87-mile trip and they put down 90 miles because it was easier to put down 90 miles. And of course, it only sounds like 3 miles at the time, not that big a deal, but you do that over the course of 2,000 to 3,000 trips a year, that adds up awful quickly. We took a look at our vehicle utilization of where our vehicles being used like they should be. We had assigned vehicles that maybe were assigned to a department that maybe sat longer than they were being driven. They just weren't being used like we thought they were being used. We had many vehicles that were not getting used or tracked, and because we weren't tracking them, we had no idea on the usage that was happening with our vehicles. We also took a look at that whole thing and said, you know what, if we purchase new vehicles, which would help us in two ways. Number one, it would give employees that good new vehicle to drive, that good vehicle experience, knowing that they could get somewhere without breaking down or having something happen to an older type vehicle. They're going to be in a good vehicle. It would improve theirs and would also improve us because we could take that money that we were going to save by paying mileage reimbursements and invest that in those new vehicles and build a bigger, stronger fleet. Now, that was all said and easily done between Troy and some others that were involved in that, and decisions that were being made. And now came the hard part, which was convincing upper management and our Scott County commissioners that this was a good idea. You know, we're going to take this money, we're going to invest in our motor pool, and in the long run, we're going to save money. We knew it was a good idea. Troy knew it was a great idea, but we had to convince that upper management and those county commissioners that was a good idea. Go ahead to the next slide, Ron. So why did we need motor pool software? So, you know, we thought about, okay, we can build our motor pool, but we need some way to manage that. We're not going to manage it the current way we're managing it. We got to come up with a better solution. So we started to look at different softwares that were out there, and came to be Agile Fleet was by far the leader at that time we looked at, and I would say are still the leader in it. But why we needed a motor pool software? So the number one thing was managing vehicles was very difficult. We didn't know where they were. We had no clue who drove them last. We didn't know where they were going to be traveled to. We didn't know how long the vehicle was sitting. We had no way, because we weren't tracking data, knowing any of those questions. Where are the keys? Well, that was the biggest thing, is where were the keys at? You know, I thought you said they were on Terry's desk, and I went there and they're not on Terry's desk. So, well, you know, who drove the car last? We had no clue where the keys were. A lot of times keys were managed in a cardboard box, you know, just thrown in a box. And hopefully the last person threw it in the cardboard box and, you know, not in their pocket to go home with that. So we had no clue where keys were. We had no accountability at all. We had no idea that who the last person was. We had no idea if that person left the vehicle dirty, or, you know, they parked the vehicle with no fuel and I jumped in the vehicle and now it's under an 8th tank and I'm already running late for my meeting. Who drove it last? So we can have some accountability. We had none of that. And then we looked at our data. We weren't getting any, and without data, we could not make decisions that were crucial in the overall managing of a fleet. If you don't have data, you can't make any decisions on how you should better your fleet or save money, and anything like that comes. So we needed to come up with a motor pool software to be able to do all that. And like I said, we chose Agile Fleet. We went live in 2013, I believe it was, and you know, it's working very, very well for us now in managing our fleet. Last but not least, is that we needed to make it easy for that employee. We had to make sure that they had a piece of software that they could use, that was easy for them to operate from the start of a reservation all the way to the end. So we went with the whole, what I call Agile package. We put in the kiosks, we put in key lockers, so employees can access that 24 hours a day. They can be able to easily get their keys in and out, return their keys, all by using those automated kiosks and key lockers. We have those in 4 of our building locations currently at different buildings of our county. Go ahead and move to the next slide here, Ron. So here's I wanted to give you a visual reference of what our county looks like. This is our county, heavy population in what is the beige color stuff at the top, the cities of Shakopee, Prior Lake, and Savage. That's our high population. And then rural, anything that's in that green area is kind of our rural area, a lot less population. Total population of about 155,000 people in our county. So some things that we've done to improve our stuff, and especially since COVID, you know, we've learned a lot since COVID, just like all of you have, is that we learned that number one is sometimes we need to change policies or procedures to maybe help us out, but in turn also help our employees. So we looked at some things. We said, you know what, a lot of our employees are starting to work from at home locations, and a lot of our employees live in those rural areas of Scott County. So we thought, hey, let's make it easier for them to be able to maybe use pool vehicles. We thought, how can we do that? So we took a look at it and we said, you know what, we have different public libraries that Scott County manages. We have those in other cities. So currently right now, if you look on the map here, we got 3 dots that are red. Those are areas that we have motor pool kiosks in already, buildings that we currently have. And then in the cities of Jordan, Belle Plaine, and Elko New Market, we have those libraries. So we thought, hey, let's put a kiosk in those library areas, in the public areas of those libraries, and then put a couple cars down there and allow users to be able to check out a vehicle. So if I have someone that lives down in Blakely Township, they can just go to Belle Plaine, check out a vehicle, and use that vehicle to do their daily trips, rather than drive all the way to Shakopee to get a car. Now that saves us two things. It makes it easier for the employee, and it's also a better chance of them using a motor pool vehicle, because we've made it easy for them to drive to Belle Plaine and get that car and not drive all the way to Shakopee, because if they have to drive all the way to Shakopee, maybe they won't use a car. They'll just use their own car and turn in mileage. And that's definitely what we don't want done. At the same time, we were able to also start some extra services by doing this. So we have a transit department here at Scott County that was able to start what's called the Hopscot program. And that's a picture up in the upper left-hand corner there of that. That's one of their vans that they got. And what it is they have a program that allows volunteer drivers to be able to use a van, use one of our vehicles to transport people that might be going to medical appointments and such that need to get around the county. It's a program that allows them to do that. So we have these vans parked at these different library locations, and our volunteer drivers go and get assigned a van, and they use the kiosks and the key lockers to get their vehicle out to be able to make these trips. So at the same time, like I said, the way we move these cars for our employees, we also got to initiate this new program that allowed us to better serve our residents of Scott County. So that was an improvement that we made here, just recently made it here, really all learning this for number one, from data being collected from Agile of vehicles not moving during COVID, because we didn't have them in the right areas. So we moved those vehicles, and now hopefully our usage will go up. So two good things that came out of COVID for our employees here at Scott County and also our residents of Scott County. You can move to the next slide, Ron. I believe this is the slide that I love to show. So we've showed this slide at a couple different Agile conferences we've been to, and it gives you a good vision of what has happened here at Scott County over the years. So if you take a look at this graph, it's mileage reimbursements paid by year. So I mentioned that it was over $230,000. So if you look at 2010 to 2013, it was over $230,000 each one of those years. 2014, the very first year we initiated the motor pool system, you can see what our mileage went down to, under $100,000. I believe it was somewhere right around $78,000. And it was like that for a couple of years, and it went up a little bit in 17. And the reason it went up in 2017 is we had a major recall on our Ford Fusions. Unfortunately, we own like 16 Ford Fusions, and it affected every single one of them, and they went out of service for 6 months. And because of that, mileage reimbursement went up a little bit, but not a lot. And then it went right back down in 2018, 2019. It's really taken a dip down in 2020 and 2021, just because some of our departments just didn't travel as much as they used to, health and human services and such like that. But this really gives you a good vision of what happened, how our mileage reimbursement went down by just implementing a good motor pool system and making it easy, like I said, once again, for the employees to be able to get cars out and such. I love this graph. Like I said, it really it shows hardcore numbers of what was being saved in our mileage reimbursement. Aaron noted there also in his little thing here, in the past 5 years, county spanning roughly 365 square miles. We saved probably over $1 million for taxpayer dollars, and that's huge to our taxpayers of Scott County. We've also been able to downsize our fleet. Using some of the data and stuff, we've been able to eliminate a couple of vehicles that we thought we needed, but we really didn't. And we've also been able to share vehicles throughout the organization. So we still have, in our motor pool system, we have vehicles that are general motor pool vehicles that can be used by anybody. And then we also have what we consider to be department vehicles that are really vehicles that are assigned to such department. So let's say the taxation department has 6 vehicles. The taxation department is really, really busy from the months of April through, August, October, somewhere in there. And then November, December, January, February, they're really, really slow and those cars being used at all. So we're able to move cars into the general motor pool and use those cars. We also have a work thing with them, a process that says if their employees don't have vehicles checked out by 8 o'clock the same day, our motor pool system is allowed to use those vehicles if we have an overflow and need to use those vehicles. So they've given us the flexibility to be able to use those cars, share cars, and at the same time, the more we can share cars and the more cars are moving and rolling down the road, we're saving taxpayer dollars because we're not paying out mileage reimbursement. So we're excited about that. We're excited about the things that are being done here at Scott County. And, you know, we're looking at always bettering ourselves here by taking a look at the data that's coming out of Agile, looking at availability reports, looking at usage reports, and trying to make better decisions in our fleet to, once again, save taxpayer dollars, save expenses, that type of stuff inside of our motor pool. Ron, I believe that's the last slide.
Jason, that's great. You know, thank you so much for helping us to sort of better understand, you know, Scott County's journey and how, you know, today you're really more effectively managing the fleet through information rather than instinct or spreadsheets, things like that. Now what I'd like to do is sort of pick up where Scott County stops and spend a little bit of time covering some topics that I hope will leave you with a little better understanding of how sharing vehicles might benefit you, your team, your organization. I'm going to review some practical information about vehicle utilization, sort of how to get your arms around this elusive metric. Next, I'll take a few moments and discuss sort of the elephant in the room, the impact that the pandemic has had on fleet operations. Then I'll use this background to highlight just a few of the benefits that automated motor pools can offer and how technology can be used to streamline process and drive some operational efficiencies. And then lastly, I'll share another sort of a brief case study about another municipal fleet's journey, I guess, to dramatically right-size their fleet using the same technology that Scott County has done. Oops, one too many. So what I'd like to do is start my portion of today's presentation by pausing to just consider the role that fleet plays within your organization. Obviously, without vehicles, you'd have a really hard time delivering the needed services to your department customers as well as your constituents. With this sort of underlining mission, the role of the fleet manager is really to ensure that the organization obviously has the proper mix of equipment to effectively deliver its services, and then manage these assets as efficiently and effectively as possible to make sure that you have the right type of assets always available, really when and where they're needed. However, the business of fleet over time has become pretty complicated, made even more so today by the rush of data that seems to flood everybody's inbox, spreadsheets, and phones every single day. Sometimes it can be really hard to easily access metrics that highlight the efficiency and the effectiveness of your fleet. Like Scott County, before they implemented Fleet Commander, you may not have a system in place to help you sort of easily understand the daily usage of your fleet. Your organization may not have clear and concise set of policies regarding the acquisition, the use, the disposal of the fleet. You may have vehicles in inventory that used to serve a valid purpose, but the mission of the specific department or the way that they go about providing the services to the taxpayers, it may have changed over time. You may have departments that want to keep a few vehicles just in case they need them at some point. And what can often be the case, fleet's budgets are often based on a backwards look, historical trends, rather than sort of a forward-looking, the needs of the organization in the future. No matter the reason, without a clear and easy set of understandable metrics, it can be really hard to determine if your fleet utilization is really in line with industry standards or trends. So the key to understanding utilization is really being able to easily identify the composition of your fleet and describe it in discrete, supportable metrics. So if you look at these two pictures here, you or your supervisor might draw two very different conclusions about your fleet. If you had to build a business case to convince a department to give up their underutilized vehicles, or maybe sort of develop a cost justification to go out and seek additional funding, as Jason said about Troy, as you were looking at buying new vehicles, you might find it a bit challenging these days, because both of these situations might really be correct during certain times of the year or based on a particular department's need. Yet either way, it's often the case that you'll have a hard time convincing management about a reasonable plan without accurate and meaningful metrics. So utilization statistics are really a critical component to making informed, fact-based decisions to drive change. So with this in mind, what's a meaningful utilization metric? I wish there was a single number, a numerical value that worked for every single fleet. But over the years, the only consistent thing that I've found that really relates to the world of fleet is that everybody calls it fleet, okay? So if you look at this sort of simple formula, most fleets need to understand how many vehicles they typically operate on a daily basis. We think of that, it's the capacity of the fleet. And then how many vehicles does the fleet need to support the mission? Well, that's the demand. So in this case, if a fleet operates, a mere 10 vehicles and they only use 5 of them on a regular basis, that's obviously a 50% utilization rate. However, when you think about utilization, there may be some other factors that make using a simple formula like that really hard, because vehicles that might be, let's say, out for repair or out of service obviously influence utilization, right? Or, if you need to augment the fleet for any reason with outside rentals, maybe it's from Enterprise or Avis or something like that, or perhaps, as was the situation at Scott County before they implemented this technology, you allow staff to use personal vehicles for business use. It's entirely possible that in many instances, you actually might have insufficient vehicles to meet the daily needs of the fleet. So any metric that you might have really helps you better understand how and why your fleet is being used. And it can really help you and your team deliver and drive meaningful savings. Many of you probably have a policy in place based on a metric that requires a minimum vehicle usage based on some, standard value to justify if a driver or a department, can have an assigned vehicle. So in this case, the fleet might have a mandate of a monthly minimum mileage of, let's say, 800 miles, a month. And if a driver in this case travels 950 miles, well, the usage is running, more than that. It's almost 120%. The bottom line really is that with a few key operating metrics, your fleet is way better off than if you weren't using any benchmarks or metrics at all. So clearly, there aren't any of us that haven't been impacted in some way, shape, or form by the global pandemic over the past couple of years, right? Whether personally, professionally, our world has certainly changed in dramatic ways that may take years for us to fully understand. Well, here at Agile, we get to deal with fleets of all shapes and sizes and configurations. And among lots of the tools that our technology enables, as Jason referred to, one of the more powerful components is reporting, really that tracks day-by-day usage of the fleet. So if you look at some sample data here from a typical municipal fleet, you'll see what's become a pretty predictable trend regarding vehicle utilization over the past 24 plus months. So if you look at this graph, the blue line represents daily fleet usage, up to and including March of 2019. We all know what that date is, March 9th. That's when, the pandemic sort of landed here in a meaningful way. And the orange line represents the change in daily fleet usage that began, with that date. What jumps off the page is that when the pandemic hit, this particular municipal's fleet's daily utilization dropped from almost 80% to something closer than 35%. I bet that many of you have experienced, the same drop in your fleet usage. I'm mentioning utilization in this context as I really want to highlight the financial impact that this change in utilization represents to a fleet. So even though this is a pretty small fleet, it's only 100 to 135 light-duty vehicles, at a 35% utilization rate, the daily cost for all of these idle vehicles is almost $1,000 a day for units that are just sitting in the parking lot. This $1,000 a day estimate is actually a pretty conservative number when thinking about all the costs of operating a vehicle in this relatively small fleet. With many of your staff now slowly returning to working in the office, we're beginning to see this trend gradually changing. So if this representative fleet really does nothing for the subsequent months, just kind of keeps going, doing what they're doing, the losses, even though they're becoming diminished, they're going to continue to accumulate. And this recurring cost will continue to balloon until changes are made. So at what point does a fleet manager, kind of reach the end of the line and decide to address this issue and make some pretty hard decisions and implement the necessary changes to offset this sort of escalating costs with a plan? Well, the upside of being able to look at daily operating data in comparing the impact that vehicle sharing has on a fleet is that for those of you that already share vehicles today, as compared to operating assigned fleets, is that when staff are working remotely and they're not driving their vehicles every day, there's not a one-to-one financial impact that these idle vehicles have on a fleet's carrying cost. As this fleet has an active vehicle sharing model in place today, for every 10 employees that haven't yet returned to the office, the fleet only has one idle vehicle when compared to a worst-case scenario where lots of fleets assign much of their vehicles on a one-to-one basis, meaning one driver to one vehicle. As a result, fleets that operate assigned units have a single vehicle sitting idle, for each employee that's not really in the office today. So for that fleet, for every assigned vehicle that they've successfully taken and put into a pool, they've effectively driven a tenfold saving to the bottom line. So you can see the potential savings that can be realized if you can somehow take departmentally assigned vehicles or individual assigned vehicles and move them into a shared pool. The savings opportunity can be huge. What we found during the pandemic is that lots and lots of municipal clients have used that downtime, that downward trend, to really make aggressive changes and look at sharing not just light-duty vehicles, but some of the vocational, the specialty equipment, the yellow iron, if you will, at the same time. So how can implementing an automated vehicle sharing system sort of help address some of these challenges? Well, as Jason mentioned earlier, reductions in operating budgets really have become kind of the norm, right? So delivering efficiencies and savings is really no longer something a fleet manager can aspire to. It's really become a mandate for survival. The benefits of implementing an automated motor pool are really pretty straightforward. By limiting the number of department or individually assigned vehicles and moving just some of these vehicles into a motor pool, fleets can rapidly make shared vehicles available to a larger community of users, dramatically reducing idle vehicle carrying costs. With real-time visibility over demand versus the capacity and types of vehicles in a pool, municipal fleets can optimize the mix and the types of vehicles within the pool, offering cleaner, newer, and safer vehicles to the user community, which drives more interest in the pool and improves, customer service at the end of the day. By automating the reservation, the approval, and the key management practices like Scott County has done, municipal fleets can dramatically reduce the burden on fleet staff. And as Jason mentioned, with integrated key control, you can provide secure 24/7 access to vehicles wherever they're most needed, including in remote locations like libraries, which to me is really an interesting approach. At the same time, you can track the custody of the keys. And then lastly, with automated vehicle sharing systems, fleets can gain real-time access to utilization and performance metrics, allowing fleet managers to turn really insights into action and more effectively managing their fleet. So how does a motor pool system work if you're not familiar with it? Well, it really starts with being able to streamline and support a wide variety of operational needs, because not every fleet operates in the same fashion. The critical components you need to keep in mind when selecting and implementing this technology really include these three sort of big functional buckets, if you will, of capability. Number one, the scheduling and coordinating the use of equipment. That's really all about making it really easy for people to go online and make a reservation, and then all the business rules and functionality in the background that automates that process. Sends auto-generated emails, creates buffers between reservations, those types of things. In the middle, number two, is all about supporting a variety of ways to dispatch vehicles, giving people the keys. So whether that be using kind of a staff location, or perhaps it's using key control, but allowing people to gain easy access to keys and pick vehicles up and return vehicles. And then lastly, really the reason why you go through the hassle of implementing technology is to enable access to metrics and analytics, as I've talked to a few moments ago. It's about reporting and automating things like billing, et cetera. So how do you take this and put this into practice in the real world? Well, what you do is you allow users to access an online reservation system. It's a website. And it's really important to be able to present that customer, that user, with a customized experience where you can communicate your organization's policies, perhaps some important information that you need to share, such as vehicle use policies or evolving COVID protocols. Flexible motor pool systems should allow a fleet to easily adapt these messages and content so that you can always maintain an informed user community. To create a reservation in an automated system, a user simply logs onto the website, they select an option to make a reservation. Adaptable screens then allow the system, like ours, to sort of adjust the workflow and approvals based on a fleet's specific needs. Next, the user simply fills in a few mandatory fields, such as when they need the vehicle, the pickup location, maybe you want to present to them some account information, billing codes, what's the purpose of your trip, that kind of stuff. But once the reservation is completed, the driver receives an automated email confirmation, sort of letting them know they're good to go and they're done. If your business needs the ability to make vehicles available on a sort of a just-in-time basis while maintaining rigorous policy controls and oversight, an automated motor pool system should support what we call grab-and-go capabilities, allowing authorized users to walk up to a kiosk and select whatever type of vehicle they're authorized to operate through a really intuitive and user-friendly touchscreen. By integrating automated motor pool software with flexible dispatch capabilities, municipal fleets can deploy the technology in a variety of ways to support whatever the unique requirements are of the business. So whether handing out keys at a staff location, using a centralized and secure key control solution or a key box, or through a standalone kiosk, the objective should be to give your customers a really intuitive and easy-to-use system that makes it simple to access vehicles when and where they're needed, just like Scott County does. Based on decades of experience implementing this technology, we found that the easier you can make it for your staff to access vehicles, the better. So using an integrated key control solution really hits the sweet spot, if you will, for a simple user experience while enforcing policy controls and oversight. And this hardware can come in a variety of shapes and sizes and configurations, really to meet whatever deployment strategies you may have. Of course, the key reason why an organization goes through the hassle, as I mentioned earlier, of buying and implementing fleet technology really isn't just to automate what are manual, labor-intensive processes or institute accountable fleet policies. An important reason to implement automated vehicle sharing is to more easily get your arms around or make sense of disparate fleet operating information, pulling this data together into a single system where you can generate actionable intelligence through reporting so that you can really drive change and institute ongoing efficiencies based on metrics. So whether it's through intuitive graphs or charts that instantly render customer demand versus capacity, quickly providing utilization and availability statistics about the motor pool fleet, frankly, even trips that are turned down, an automated motor pool system needs to make useful data available in formats that quickly highlight really a motor pool's performance and directs the fleet manager to decisions or changes that can be made to optimize the fleet's performance. Okay, now that we've covered sort of a variety of topics ranging from Scott County's unique approach to generating real-world savings to ways in which you might proactively tackle right-sizing in your fleet, let's take a quick look at another municipal fleet's journey where they slash their fleet size and their fleet costs while improving their customer service. Happens to be the city of Stamford, Connecticut. So this particular fleet is located in the Northeast, and it's made up of about 1,000 vehicles. The composition of the fleet is pretty typical for municipal fleets, so they've got heavy equipment, sanitation trucks, as well as about 80 light-duty vehicles that were used by various city departments. As with most municipal fleets, they had a parking lot next to the government center where the vehicle sat, and at any given time of the day, pretty much anyone could gaze out a window and watch most of these vehicles just sitting there collecting dust, right? They rarely moved. The way these vehicles were managed prior to implementing an automated motor pool system was that each department had their own assigned, let's call it a sub-fleet. These vehicles were, frankly, often poorly maintained and abused, as anyone could really drive them at any time, right? There was limited accountability or controls in place. If a vehicle happened to be damaged, no one really knew who caused the damage, And the mileage of these vehicles varied wildly. Often the oldest vehicles were rarely driven, right? Because users didn't want to drive the oldest and rattiest vehicle. They always want to drive the brightest and shiniest and newest vehicle. As is often the case when vehicles are assigned to departments or individual drivers, the fleet manager had little insight into vehicle utilization. This type of situation probably sounds pretty familiar to most of you that have joined us today, because it's something we run into all the time with municipal fleets. As is often the case in this situation, without technology or concise, accurate metrics to document the impact that these idle vehicles had on their fleet, the city really weren't in a position to make any change. So the way they started to get their arms around the situation was by implementing not only an online reservation system with self-service dispatch, they even made the commitment to implement GPS technology in their fleet to really automate the collection of vehicle usage data and make it a really seamless and systematized process. To deal with the natural resistance to these types of cultural changes within an organization, the management team met with each department head, really to explain that with a new motor pool system, their costs would be reduced, while availability and access to newer, better maintained vehicles would actually improve. They assured the department heads that they'd continue to tweak the number of vehicles in the pool to make sure that their staff never would be without a vehicle. And they weren't afraid to accommodate the department's need to maintain an assigned vehicle, as long as they had a compelling reason to keep it at the end of the day. So when the fleet began this project, this was the current state of their administrative fleet. They had lots of vehicles assigned to individual departments that were improperly maintained and managed on a pretty inconsistent fashion. So once they were done meeting with each of the department heads, they took these 80 vehicles and they transitioned the ownership away from the departments and assigned these 80 vehicles to the fleet department. Now, for some organizations, this step can be pretty challenging, as individual departments may have been depreciating these assets for a while, and getting the finance to transfer the assets to a different department's books may have taken a bit of convincing. Yet once this step was completed, the fleet manager immediately took 49 of the best vehicles and moved them into the central motor pool. Then he parked 31 of the oldest vehicles out back of the fleet facility. He basically hid them so that the city managers couldn't see them. He didn't want to get rid of all those vehicles right away, just in case he ran into a situation where the 49 vehicles might not have been enough to meet the ongoing needs of the city. But lo and behold, after operating the motor pool for a few months, what this fleet manager found is that based on actual vehicle data, usage data, most of the 49 vehicles that he staged in the pool were frankly underutilized. Based on his fleet usage data, he found that he could meet the daily needs of his customers, not with 49 vehicles, but actually with 23. And they never ran into a situation where they wouldn't have enough vehicles to fill the need, to fill a request. As a result of these efforts, the city of Stamford reduced their administrative fleet by more than 70% without sacrificing customer service. The net result of all of these efforts is that this particular municipal fleet obviously dramatically improved not only the sustainability of their fleet by implementing a culture of sharing through the use of an automated motor pool, but they've now made the right type of vehicles available at the right time to a larger community of users while implementing clear lines of accountability. And they've automated a lot of the time-consuming processes such as collecting mileage and reduced one portion of their fleet by almost 60 vehicles. These changes, just like Scott County, have resulted in operational and financial savings totaling more than $1.3 million. And more importantly, their cost avoidance for future expense of buying new vehicles continues to grow over the years since then. So during these difficult times, when municipal fleets are being buffeted by uncertainty, and you're continually pressured to find cost savings, one of the most effective ways to gain some semblance of control is to focus on areas that you can define and then adapt and implement change. By concentrating on developing meaningful utilization metrics, you can ensure that you only operate the right types and quantity of vehicles that are needed. And you can begin to deploy them so that they're available really when and where they're needed. With accurate and timely utilization data, you can begin to optimize the composition of your fleet to reflect the current and future needs of the organization. And as we continue to come out of the pandemic, hopefully reduce and redeploy underutilized equipment. With an automated motor pool system in place, you can eliminate labor-intensive processes, all while reducing costs and improving customer satisfaction. And with systematized reporting, you can make it easier for staff to report, monthly mileage or mandatory usage data, excuse me, etc. Remember, you're not alone. Agile has dozens of similar municipal fleets just like yours, whether it's Troy sitting in for Aaron today, or Jason's operation in Scott County. This technology can really be a benefit. And if you have any questions or you'd like to speak with other like-minded fleet professionals that have successfully implemented just a few of the suggestions that we've described today, let us know and we can put you in touch. Now I'd like to take a few minutes to respond to any questions that may have come in during the presentation. And as we do, keep in mind that we have loads of resources available on our website, ranging from thought-provoking white papers such as the one shown here, to case studies and tools to help you develop an internal business case for implementing vehicle sharing technology. If you prefer a more personal touch, feel free to reach out to me or any of my colleagues at Agile, and we can assist you with a personalized fleet savings assessment and all sorts of other things. You can pick up the municipal magazine and read the article about Stanford, or right up here, the latest municipal magazine that was released this month about Scott County and the work that they've done up in Minnesota. So with that, I'd like to pause and open it up to questions.
Ron, this is Jason. I just wanted to add a couple things, Ron, that I just thought about when you were giving your presentation. Is number one is when you're setting up a motor pool or you have an existing motor pool, maybe things ain't working right. And the number one thing that we spent a lot of time on doing was, and I know Ron mentioned a few times, was creating those good policies and creating those policies that you can fall back on. So we spent good time doing that. For me as an admin of the software, it was hard to tell a user that they had to fill up a vehicle with fuel if it was at a quarter tank or less. But now that I have a policy and they read those policies, I can tell them, remember, in the Scott County policy, it says this, you must do this. So it's a good way to fall back on those policies, and those policies can help you drive your motor pool. The other thing is Ron mentioned it also was listen to your peers and listen to the employees that are using your vehicles. We had an instance when we first started with our kiosks and key lockers. Employees were telling us they went up there, they had to tap on the screen, they had to insert their username and their password, and it took forever. Really, it didn't. It took a minute, but to them it was forever because we're delaying them to go on their trip. So we reached out to Agile and said, you got any improvements that can help this? And they said, absolutely. Let's install some card readers so they can just scan their badge at the kiosk. So for a relatively inexpensive cost, we were able to put card readers on all of our kiosks and just make the overall experience for the end user so much easier, so much more pleasant, that they enjoy using the system and they'll enjoy driving cars because it's so easy. So just a couple extra points that I just wanted to stress.
Jason, that's great information. And I have to tell you, as you were talking about, for instance, the RFID readers, one of the things that we found is that by making it as easy as possible, like you said, it actually sort of knocks down the barriers to sharing. Let's face it, in a municipal environment, one of the hardest things to do is to take the vehicles away from a department and put them into a pool, because people don't want to give those things up. And what we've found over time is that once people, if you can set the system up and make it intuitive and friendly, it actually, they enjoy the experience, and it really sort of knocks down those barriers to giving up those vehicles, because they realize, hey, wait a minute, the vehicles are there when I need them, and B, it's really easy to use the system. That's great. Thank you, Jason. I know we had a question before this. Someone sent in a question as they were signing up for this session. How can we share vehicles if staff is not there to manage a shared vehicle? And hopefully we address that question, as Jason was talking about, by putting kiosks out in the libraries. There's not people at the library that is managing this process. The driver just walks in and accesses the vehicles themselves. So, obviously there's people in the library, but they're not fleet people, I would assume. So that's the way we address it.
I had a question, and it's in the little chat box. as well.
Oh, great. Thank you, Robin. Go ahead. Ask away.
I typed in, could you please go back to your chart that showed the cost-benefit analysis? I'm not sure what the title was, but I would have called it cost-benefit.
Okay. Was it one of these reports back in
That's
here?
That's it. Whoa.
That's it. Okay, great.
That's it.
Thank you, Robin.
Thank you. I just wanted to look at that for a sec, if you don't mind.
Sure, of course.
I'm sure that got the attention of a lot of people.
Yeah. Well, Robin, just as you're aware, one of the things that I mentioned very quickly when I was wrapping up is we work with a lot of fleets and actually make available at no cost what we call a fleet assessment, where we can actually have, a 10-minute conversation and ask you a few questions that allows us to actually calculate what the savings would be if you were to implement vehicle sharing technology, effectively giving you the return on investment. What's the ROI for implementing technology? I've been in and around fleet management software and technology for quite a while, and one of the things I've found is that when you're dealing with chief financial officers, chief information technology officers, people like that, if you can present them with a return on investment, that's typically under 24 months, but if you can do it 18 months, 12 months to 8 months, where the system pays for itself, implementing technology is actually pretty easy and pretty straightforward. It's when you're looking at something that's going to take 10 years to pay for itself, well, that's harder to justify. And what we found is that by implementing this kind of technology, much like Scott County did, by implementing their technology, they effectively reduced their, in one single case, mileage reimbursement that more than paid for the system in year one. So that becomes a very compelling business case to implement not only technology, but vehicle sharing.
We've also, one other thing, Ron, that we've also done here at Scott County, you're probably aware of, is that we implemented a new mileage reimbursement module through Agile that was created for us that you guys have a portion of, that allows us to be able to now, because we do have some employees that still get mileage reimbursement, but it allows them to manage it through the web app. So we make sure they check out a vehicle first, or try to get a vehicle. If the system tells them no vehicles available, they can use their vehicle for personal mileage reimbursements. But this module now will check that to make sure they look for a vehicle first, and then it also allows them then to put it into the system, and then electronically that's being submitted to their supervisor for approval. So we've eliminated the steps then of the paper process and all that manual process entry that happened to. Now it's all electronic. The approval process goes to the supervisor, which then flows through the accounting department, which then issues the employee a check at payroll time. So there's definitely advantages to that too, just by implementing a new module of the software.
Great point, and it really enforces rigor around the county's policy of, hey, if there's a vehicle isn't available, great, you can use your vehicle for personal, for business use and get reimbursed. But you have to check first. It sort of just enforces, as I said, rigor around that policy. And really, it goes back to, Jason, the statement you started with early on about policies being really important. You need to have them. And if you don't follow your own policy, or if you do follow your own policy, you actually can you can implement some meaningful change.
Yeah, that's one thing that, I compliment Troy Beam, the fleet manager here, who's on the call with us, and maybe he'll chime in on this, but that's where I compliment him when we first started to start the process of getting a motor pool. I was very excited about the new cars and the new software because I'm a technology guy, and Troy always said, no, let's start with the policies first. Let's create those policies first, because we need to fall back on those if something goes awry with an issue of something. We need to be able to fall back on our policies. So I compliment him for keeping that vision of, let's create the policies first, then we'll create the motor pool and the software, but let's create those policies first.
Yeah, great point. Any other questions? Well, gosh, everybody, listen, thanks so much for attending today. As I mentioned at the start, we recorded this, and we certainly will make this material available to you to follow up on this. Thanks so much for joining us today. I hope you found the topic interesting. And, you know, I don't want the opportunity to pass without my thanks to Jason and Troy for participating today. It's really been great having you here, so thank you.
Thanks again, Ron, for allowing us to be part of it and just to share our information. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Everybody be safe and have a great rest of your day.